There's been a lot of fanfare and conversation about Oprah's recent interventions in the election to support Kamala Harris. And while I think there's been a lot of interesting things said, what I see here is I see a phenomenon that is actually rather tragic in how it plays out in our society and also impacts how many of us understand ideas that are being disseminated by the talking heads of our society. So in this video, I'm going to walk through some of what Oprah is doing recently, but I'm going to address and analyze what she is doing, like these town halls, going to the DNC, so on and so forth, within the context of her role as a intellectual second-hand dealer of ideas. And if this concept is unfamiliar to you right now, I promise you, by the time this video ends, it will be quite clear to you, and you will be able to apply it to other people doing similar things and prevent the wool from being pulled over your eyes by them and their machinations. Before we get into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to ensure that our channel and our mission more broadly is successful. My friends, 20,000 subscribers on the horizon. I'm so excited. I'm happy to be building this pensive army of thinkers that will help, ultimately, I hope, help be a part of the movement to restore our republic to its best days and to its virtues. So thank you guys so much for being here. Now, please enjoy the video. So, Oprah recently held a Unite for America rally, or that's what she called it at least, with Kamala Harris in Michigan. And at this rally was a star-studded event. So many different celebrities, from Jennifer Lopez to Ben Stiller to just so many different people, Julia Roberts, so many different names across industries, Chris Rock, were there in support of Kamala. And there was a massive Zoom wall, a lot of people in the audience. And a lot of people have noted correctly that Kamala's performance during this rally was not very good. She committed a lot of the same errors that has characteristically defined her campaign, such as the talking in circles, such as the vague appeal to general words and concepts, these sort of rhetorical flourishes that ultimately mean nothing.
We really would love to know what your plan is to help lower the cost of living.
Yeah, first of all, thank you both for being here. And yours is a story I hear around the country as I travel. And in terms of both rightly having the right to have aspirations and dreams and ambitions for your family, and working hard and finding that the American dream is, for this generation and so many recently, far more elusive.
But I was watching Oprah during this event, and what I saw was actually quite interesting. So before I get into the event itself, let me actually tell you guys what I'm thinking about here. So within the history of political ideas, there is this concept called a second-hand dealer of ideas. Now, this concept was really coined, and a lot of emphasis was put onto it in the 20th century. And there are two thinkers that come to mind when I think of this concept. Friedrich Hayek, F.A. Hayek, who was one of the intellectual luminaries of Western civilization, in my opinion, great conservative thinker, and John Maynard Keynes. Now, I'm not a fan of Keynes, and you will not hear me mention Keynes very much on this channel, because I believe his economic theory is erroneous, and I think that his ideas have inflicted great harm upon the world and upon America, most importantly. But both of them had their own formulations of what a second-hand dealer of ideas is. So in order to be, I think, holistic in my approach here, I will quote how both of them saw this concept. John Maynard Keynes, in his General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, said the following. He said, quote, "The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. I am sure that the power of vested interest is vastly exaggerated compared with the gradual encroachment of ideas. Sooner or later, it is ideas, not vested interests, which are dangerous for good or evil. Now, Keynes has a moment of clarity here, and for once in his career, he's actually correct. Ideas are ultimately the overriding thing that moves men, not temporal interest. Yes, temporal interest, like if they have a vested stake in seeing someone succeed, like if they have investments in a particular thing, like if they're a part of a certain group, those things matter and those things shape human behavior. But ultimately, behind those things don't move unless there is an idea behind them. This will become very important to establishing what a secondhand dealer of ideas is in a moment. Now, F.A. Hayek, in his famous essay, Intellectuals and Socialism, he takes this idea, but he goes a very different direction with it. So he puts the idea of a secondhand dealer within the context of the rise of socialism within the West. He says, in light of recent history, it is somewhat curious that this decisive power of the professional secondhand dealers in ideas should not yet be more generally recognized. The political development of the Western world during the last 100 years furnishes the clearest demonstration. Socialism has never and nowhere been at first a working class movement. It is by no means an obvious remedy for the obvious evil which the interest of that class will necessarily demand. It is a construction of theorists deriving from certain tendencies of abstract thought with which for only a long time only the intellectuals were familiar. So what Hayek is saying is socialism was primarily a fascination of the learned, the intellectuals, the academics, but average people didn't have much to do with it. He goes on to say this, and it required long efforts by the intellectuals before the working classes could be persuaded to adopt it as their program. He goes on to say, in every country that has moved towards socialism, the phase of development in which socialism becomes a determining influence on politics has been preceded for many years by a period in which socialist ideas governed the thinking of the more active intellectuals. In Germany, this last stage had reached towards the end of the century. Then he goes on and on and on. So what he basically said is, the ideas of socialism moved from the intellectual class, and they fell upon the society. But they also fell upon the society, and this wasn't mentioned in this particular quote, but they fell upon the society by people who took those ideas and applied them for mass appeal. This is the second-hand dealer of ideas. So what is a second-hand dealer? A second-hand dealer of ideas is any person that is not necessarily a thinker or a philosopher or someone who deals with ideas intimately. They are someone who have a distant familiarity with ideas, but repeat the words of intellectuals and thinkers of philosophers that they particularly like without critically examining those words, and then mass disseminate those words through their particular medium. So a second-hand dealer can be a cartoonist. It can be a political commentator. It can be a radio broadcaster. It can be a sports player that makes a certain gesture or a certain move during the sports rounds. It can be anyone that has any degree of public influence within the consciousness, or even if the influence is limited. The second-hand dealer is someone that, just like a car dealer or a drug dealer, doesn't create or deal with the product. They just hand out the product. Now, Oprah. I can cite 3 instances within the past few months as of posting this video of Oprah being a second-hand dealer of ideas, and I will, because I believe in proving my thesis. Let us first go to this one, where Oprah, during this America rally that she did with Kamala Harris, mentioned the word joy and added a endorsement towards it. Go.
There's been so much talk. There's been so much talk about that word joy, and I think it's such a good thing because it means that there is a real feeling of optimism and hope, making that comeback, as Michelle Obama said, for this new day. That's no longer on the horizon. The new day is actually here.
Now, for those of you who are aware, and I've done a big video about this, joy is the ethos, or at least the Kamala Harris version of joy, the progressivist version of joy, which is not actual joy, is the ethos of the Kamala Harris campaign. And this ethos is particularly sinister because joy is an emotion, and emotions cannot be rationally applied for political purposes in truth. But the Kamala Harris campaign wishes for the emotion of joy to be the guiding consideration and justification of her ascension to the presidency, so much so that they are basically trying to suspend the ability of people to be rational actors within this current election and use emotions as a tool to get her into office. So what's the danger of joy in this context? The danger of joy or any emotion in a political context is that it suspends judgment and it creates a new standard of value that is not based on what people who are actually critically thinking about political issues should be engaging in. It is not the rational standard of value. It is not the ethical standard of value. It is an emotion. And Oprah just endorsed that idea right before you. You see how she's a second-hand dealer now? Let's go on. During the DNC, Oprah said the progressivist phrase, which sends chills down my spine, and I think is also quite significant to understanding how they view civilization on the left, at least on the progressive left. We're not going back, go.
We won't go back. We won't be set back, pushed back, bullied back, kicked back. We're not going back.
Now again, this is also an idea that doesn't come from Oprah, but has a very long lineage within the history of political ideas, going all the way back to the progressive era, which I will harp on time and time again on this channel, which fundamentally and drastically transformed how so many Americans saw their relationship with the government and the relationship between the government and the Constitution and between the Constitution and the change of society. Within the progressive era, the democratic interest, as people like Herbert Crowley and other intellectuals of that era were so keen to argue, became the overriding consideration of all political matters. That is, whatever the society at that point in time wanted became, or what the society deemed good, became the overarching political standard. What was in the Constitution, what was general first principles, or as Wilson described it in one of his essays, the laws of Newton, these sort of disinterested things, those things became alienated and became seen as bad and out of touch with what the people wanted. Therefore, there was an active push within the progressive era to abolish the Constitution. We're not going back is a convenient excuse to deny the virtues of the past by painting the past as a negative experience, and then by doing that, substituting the past for something else, because you cannot have a political movement, you cannot have a social movement in a vacuum. You need some foundation, you need some standard by which to move, otherwise you become incoherent. This is simply a law of nature. And therefore, what do you use to replace the past? You have to use something. For the progressives, it is the present. It is the present. It is the present in the context of the victories they believe they've achieved within their ideology, and they wish to move that forward. We're not going back as simply a clarion call to forget the virtues of the past and to move forward with your mission of dramatically changing society according to your vision. He who forgets the past is one that cannot conduct wisdom, because wisdom is about having enough introspection to realize that within the context of history, you were at one point and there are people who had good things to say at other points, even if those people didn't agree with you. We're not going back. Again, Oprah is dealing this idea. Second-hand dealer. Last one. The immigration problem. Now, Oprah basically touched on Springfield during her town hall, but she didn't touch on it significantly. She used Springfield to dismiss criticisms over Haitians being there by basically saying that people have been scared and there's a bunch of lies. Go.
Having to deal with this lie that has endangered the lives of Haitian people and anybody who looks Haitian. Everybody in America feels for that. And everybody in America, left, right, middle, has concerns about immigration.
Now, the notion that you can't talk about immigration, or you can't talk about immigration in a critical way because it may inspire some kind of discomfort, or it may inspire some kind of disdain for native people, or rather of foreign peoples, is a notion that progressives have been harping on for the past 7-8 years. Even beyond that, it is a notion that is at the core of their philosophy surrounding immigration. And Oprah Winfrey is basically, in a very distilled way, pushing this idea. She may not even know it, but she is a second-hand dealer in progressive ideas. What is the tragedy of this? The tragedy of being a second-hand dealer of ideas is that you don't actually, this goes for anybody who's a second-hand dealer in any idea. The tragedy is you don't actually intimately engage with the ideas that flow off your tongue and that bind your thinking and that guides your actions, at least in some limited respect. In the case of Oprah, they are guiding her actions in terms of how she interacts with the political universe. You don't engage with them intimately, and that means you don't really have a good sense of their flaws. And if you can't understand the flaws of something, and you only understand the merits of something, you have what we call a one-sided view. And a one-sided view can give you unrealistic expectations of something, and it can cause you to view the world in a way that is not correct, and if applied with that limited understanding, can cause bad outcomes. In order to think rationally and fully about something, you must consider things from all angles. The second-hand dealer of ideas is not someone who inherently does that. They're someone who simply speaks. And the tragedy is, Oprah is kind of locked in this cycle of just being an emissary for these notions, so much so that she is just willing to speak them without even the regard to basic factual truth, without even the regard to asking the question, are these concepts sound? That is the tragedy of the second-hand dealer, whether it be Oprah or anybody else. They are simply passive receivers, sponges that soak up the information and excrete it out without processing it in between that entire cycle. That's danger. A society of thinkers is what we need, not a society of receivers and a society of transmitters. The second-hand dealer of ideas can be a boon for society, but only if that person is intellectually honest enough to actually check what they believe. Many people, especially if they have a stake in their particular vision of the world succeeding, won't do that. That is the tragedy of the second-hand dealer of ideas. Now, by the way, it's not the first time she did this. She's been doing this since in the 90s with the New Age stuff, laws of attraction. She didn't come up with that. She was simply a transmitter for the law of attraction. And despite the various theological critiques that were given of that law, or the various critiques that were given from people who were not coming from a theological viewpoint, but just were more generally, skeptical of it, Oprah still pushed back because her entire brand was built upon being a second-hand dealer for the New Age ideology, if you can even call it that. New Age obviously is a bunch of different things, but still, you can understand what I mean. So, what I think we should all do, we should all be very keen to ask ourselves, why do I believe what I believe? What are the downsides of my worldview? What are the flaws of my worldview? What are the merits? And weigh those things together. Because in that case, you are going beyond just being a second-hand dealer. And you are now a thinker. And a thinker doesn't just deal ideas, he refines ideas. And when you're able to refine ideas and adapt them for the particular situation that you are in, my friend, you can then go into any circumstance, any particular area, any particular community, and potentially give someone a life-changing experience, potentially cause someone to have a seed planted in their mind that otherwise wouldn't have been there, and then therefore give them a broader view of the world. Those who have a broader view of the world are those who are able to better reckon with the world. That is what we need in order to restore this country. But so long as the Oprah Winfreys and the second-hand dealers continue to ride up high on their horses and wreak havoc upon the culture by being transmitters and not thinkers, we will continue to deal with the consequences of bad ideas. In F.A. Hayek's day, it was the spread of socialism. In our day, it's going to be, unfortunately, the spread of vibes, joy, and the progressive hell that inevitably ensues after those things take their effect within the minds of the people of our country. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can to get our message out there. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.